Hi, my name is Anna Shedletsky. I'm CEO and founder of Instrumental, a manufacturing technology company. And so today I'm actually going to walk you through a presentation I did at Defects November 2018 on the 5 factors that are putting pressure on manufacturing and manufacturers to do better, and how different technologies, including AI, will likely help. And so in this presentation, I'm going to go pretty quickly through because I want to get to the meat of what's important. And it's going to be a lot more casual than the actual presentation I did at IDTechX. But I hope that it's really helpful in kind of putting a framework about why it's more difficult to build now than it seemed like it was even a decade ago, 5 years ago. So as a little bit of background, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I was at Apple for 6 years, and even during the 6 years that I was there was a major difference when I started and the first project I worked on and how easy that felt. It was iPod Touch 4th generation. And the last project I worked on there, which was leading product design for Apple Watch Series 1, which was a very challenging project. And so it seemed like even during that 6-year period, it got harder to do what should have been the same thing. It was a similar amount of complexity, but actually it was more challenging. So what were the factors that are actually causing that pressure and that change? And that has only continued to happen since I've left Apple and actually started Instrumental. So let's dive in. So 100 years ago, factories looked like this. They're pretty manual. There was a lot of different types of operations and a lot of potential human error. Unfortunately, while there's been some improvements, manufacturing space for many verticals is actually pretty similar. Consumer electronics is still incredibly manual. Automotive is another industry that's pretty manual, apparel, and there's many more, including things like medical devices and space and defense, which you would expect would be quite advanced, are actually kind of trailing in terms of advancement in the manufacturing process. But that's okay, because even though we don't live in the fully automated lights out future today, we're building in that direction. And so something that's really near and dear to my heart personally, and as a personal pet peeve of mine, is that when we start to think about technology for manufacturing, we really have to focus on what matters. And what matters most is actually improving manufacturing outcomes. So that's things like yield, throughput, uptime, time to market, customer satisfaction of the end user, general efficiency of the manufacturing process. If you're evaluating technologies that doesn't actually influence one of these 5 things, you're wasting your time. This is what matters in the manufacturing space, and this is what Instrumental focuses on as we're building technology to help meet needs in this space. And something that's been interesting is that over the last decade or so, a lot of pressure has actually been building on manufacturers, and it's gotten harder to maintain the status quo on these metrics. So think back to the last couple of programs that you've done over that period of time, and I feel like many of us who come from the space has like a feeling of like, oh, back in the good old days, we did our EVT build in 3 days, got out of China and shipped it all back. It was only like 100 units. We didn't need to build thousands, and now we need to build thousands. And across multiple verticals, there's kind of stories like this about how the complexity has significantly increased, and it's just gotten a lot harder to get a product to market and then to have that product be successful in market, not only for the product to be successful, but for the business to be successful making that product, to have that be a positive transaction for the business, or investment, I guess is a better word. So I'm going to go through those 5 pressures pretty quickly. There's really 4 that are particularly adding pressure, and then the 5th, which is automation, is kind of a catalyst and a wild card that's actually not only creating some opportunity, but it's changing things up a little bit. So let's dive in. The first of the pressures is general increase in product complexity. And I don't think anybody will argue with this one. A mobile phone used to be this big, and now I can make a phone call on my watch. And so the miniaturization has been dramatic over the last several decades. We have advanced sensors that are very complicated and very sensitive, like advanced camera modules, autofocus camera modules, MEMS sensors, things that need to be protected in order to function well. They're very sensitive. And then we also have a lot of products that rely on feature fusion. So what I mean by feature fusion is that it's the combination of several sensitive sensors working together that delivers the customer experience. So perhaps something like on an Apple Watch where you have a GPS sensor, but you also have a health sensor, and maybe you combine those together to create some useful end user application. And if either of those doesn't work well, the end user application falls apart as well. So in general, there's just a lot of complexity in the products that are being built today, way more so than even a decade ago. There's also been a dramatic increase in user expectations around not only the cosmetic quality of the products and it being free of scratches and blemishes when they first receive the product, but things like the UI and generally the robustness of the product itself. So just user expectations are much higher. I think Apple is to blame for this. They have very high standards that have enabled and have shipped products that are incredibly high levels of quality that have really made the entire rest of the industry that's trying to compete have to do the same thing. And I think actually the Appleification in terms of that expectations has transitioned from consumer electronics only to other industries. So even in automotive and how the interior of a car is designed, similar kind of thing, or how the body panels come together on that car. There's just a higher sensitivity of the general population to cosmetic issues and general robustness of the products. There's also a really interesting change because with the prevalence of social media and online marketplaces, users have more power than ever to actually badmouth companies and impact their bottom line. So think about just the humble Amazon review and the last time that you looked for something on Amazon. So let's say you're going to buy a robotic vacuum cleaner and you're looking through the list of all the different robotic vacuum cleaners that you could buy, and my eye goes immediately to that star rating. And so if you're looking at two similarly priced vacuum cleaners, you're not sure which one to buy. Well, yeah, but this one has 4.5 stars and like over 100 reviews. So that one seems like a better risk to take than one that has only 3 stars. And so this kind of how strongly a negative review on Amazon can actually impact the bottom line is something that actually several instrumental customers are starting to explore and analyze, and it's something they're keeping an eye on. And the problem with Amazon reviews having so much influence is that it only takes a couple of failures. We're talking onesie, twosie bad experiences that can early on in the shipping cycle of a new product, that can dramatically change what the star rating is. And it can be really difficult for a company to overcome that low star rating even if they've made improvements to the product since, because those early reviews actually put a direct drag on sales. And so buyers have power more so than ever before, and I think it makes it so that perfection levels have to be even higher than they were before. In the past, you just had to deliver some perfect units to some technology pundits or technology reviewers for the consumer electronics space, and that was enough to get the reviews, and people would read the reviews and would buy the products based on that. No more. A lot of democratization here has really actually changed buying behavior and does influence how many units a company will sell. Fourth one, highly competitive markets. This is obvious, but it's the case. Because there's a lot of choice in the marketplace, low reviews doesn't result in a customer having to buy it anyway. They can go find another product that has the same functionality, the same feature set, better reviews, better performance. And so certainly there are tons of markets we can think of with a lot of competition, but there's also this a lot of very fast copying that happens in the industry. And so even if you do have a unique product in the marketplace, within 6 months, if that product is successful, there'll be a copy available by some other brand. And so this highly competitive marketplace makes it really difficult it means that you have to be perfect from day one and actually recoup a lot of your R&D investment early on in the sales process of that, in the launch process of that new product. You don't get to make up those sales over a long period of time. It also means the faster you can get your product into market with that new chipset or that new camera that is a differentiator in the marketplace, the more units you'll be able to sell before your competitors are able to catch up with you. So it's actually creating a need to go faster and a need to have higher quality at launch. And then I kind of alluded to automation as the fifth factor, but automation really plays a role more of a catalyst, I think, than a pressure factor, but it creates a lot of opportunity. So automation has two impacts. One is that manufacturers who had traditionally been less interested in new technologies have seen positive ROI from adding automation equipment to their lines. And so this has created positive feelings about technology that has opened the door for other types of technologies to enter the manufacturing line and be part of the manufacturing line, which was not an easy path before. There's also a lot of brands and large companies that even have industrial IoT teams or factory of the future teams that are actively looking for new technologies to bring onto the line. So that's creating some change in the manufacturing process as these new technologies are incorporated. There's a secondary impact as well of automation. And that's just frankly that in an industry that was predominantly people, you don't have a lot of ability to get data in and out from the process. The people don't have I/O ports you can't plug in, but robots do. And so you can get a large amount of high-value data very easily from automation, and that data actually creates an opportunity to solve a lot of the problems that these pressures are putting on the manufacturing industry. So going back to what we talked about, if we're trying to drive outcomes in the face of these pressures, how do we do it? And the hint here is if it's a buzzword, it's probably wrong. We know how to solve problems on a manufacturing process, whether it's in dev or in production. And it means work. It means finding issues and solving problems. And that process, that cycle of finding issues and solving problems requires highly skilled engineers to do, and people, and a lot of time, unfortunately. And so this is not a fast process, and it's pretty manual today. First, they have to find the issues. They need to actually root cause the issue through doing failure analysis. Once they have a root cause, they can propose a corrective action, and then they need to validate that that solution is actually going to solve the problem. And this process is manual, it's inefficient, and it's actually quite porous. Your engineers may not be working on the biggest problems, and they may not even know what the biggest problems are because they haven't really been discovered yet. And that discovery process is a large portion of the luck that sometimes is part of developing a new product, and also sometimes the downfall of new product. So what can we do about this? Well, in the short term, I think it means building a modern data foundation. By having better data of the manufacturing process, it is possible to identify opportunities to improve the product and the process, whether that's in development or in production. And the way that we propose to do that to start, because we're still in a world where there's so much manual work involved in this feedback loop, is that we can use technology to actually accelerate parts of this process that humans do today. And so the two obvious parts of the process that we can work to accelerate, the first is root causing issues, and the second is validating solutions. So if we have good data from the manufacturing line, we can quickly identify what those issues are, what's causing them. And so we need less people to do that. We can do it in a shorter amount of time. And then once an engineer has come up with the corrective action, they can then validate that solution much more quickly because they have the data to show that it's actually better. And so you essentially, by accelerating these parts of the process, you can do more with less. I talked about this data foundation. What do I mean? Well, there's kind of 3 steps to it, I think. The first is traceability. That's being able to actually track the units that are on your line. I will acknowledge that in my head, I'm always thinking about discrete manufacturing processes, and there's certainly, I think, different complexity for continuous manufacturing. But in the discrete manufacturing world, you do need traceability. You need to know, when was this particular unit made? This particular unit needs a serial number. Well, it's impractical for some products that are very low value or incredibly high volume, like medical gloves or things like that, to have individual serial numbers. It is practical for most consumer electronics or electronics products in general, for parts that go into automotive, etc. And so when practical, having this traceability is really valuable. And so that means barcodes and serial numbers, and it means systems that can take that information and create a track and trace record for you. The second is visibility, the ability to actually you build that on top of the traceability systems you have in place. And what it does is it takes those serial numbers and it starts to do analytics based on your process. And so visibility into your process means knowing how many units were input, what was the yield, what was the output, what are your metrics to those better outcomes. What are they today? If you're not measuring them, it's impossible to actually move the needle to improve them. And then the third one is proactivity, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Let's kind of maybe think about the foundations for traceability and visibility first. So Instrumental builds a product, and you can find out more about it on our website at instrumental.com. And I won't talk about it too much here, but the concept is that actually Instrumental is a standalone way to get very quickly get, without integration, traceability and visibility on your manufacturing line. You'll know how many units went through yesterday, whether it's a dev or a production line, what the yields were, what are the top issues. You can see when the line was down or up, whether trends are increasing or decreasing. And so that kind of visibility enables engineers to actually focus on the top issues that they need to work on, and accelerate those key phases of the kind of feedback process to improve products. And so when we think about data, Instrumental is thinking about it from the perspective that if we can collect a high-resolution data set, whether it's from our equipment or from equipment on the line provided by our customers, and we can combine that with some basic statistics, basic math, nothing fancy, then we can actually generate these artificial insights that accelerate processes for engineers. So engineers are still involved today, but in the future, maybe they will have to be involved less and less. Having these insights leads to action. Engineers know what to do with that information. They can create an action on the line, and that action results in a better outcome. Hopefully something like improved yield or reduced defect rate. So how can we kind of prove that having that better data gives a better outcome? Well, Instrumental works with a top 10 cell phone brand, and we've worked on 4 cell phones to date, maybe more, and to come. And in this particular case study or use case of the Instrumental product, Instrumental was used to take high-resolution images at several states of assembly throughout the development process of a new cell phone. The photos here are photos from a different cell phone product that is not the product that we worked on, but a representative of the stages of assembly where the photos were taken on the line. Instrumental technology identifies anomalies in those photos using machine learning technology. So there is a buzzword involved, but what it's doing is finding those anomalies on behalf of our customers so that their performance-based test stations and their inspection systems don't have to find them. This particular data is from the last day of PVT, which is essentially right before this product went from development into production. And we were able to identify a large percentage of what we call dark yield defects. So those are defects that would normally have escaped the factory and been shipped into the field and resulted in an unhappy customer. Those are something that would impact the general performance of the product in the field, but can't be caught by existing test stations or not reliably caught by existing test stations. So that'd be things like connectors that aren't fully seated, et cetera. And there's actually a large percentage of defect that was classified as dark yield defect. And then the second level thing that having better data can help you do is actually do yield protection. And so because we can identify defects at particular places on the line where they're much easier to fix than waiting until the unit is fully snapped and you're doing a test station further down the line. And so we found about 2.5% of all the units they were building had defects that we could identify earlier in the manufacturing process. Overall, we were able to create a lot of cost avoidant savings for our customer just by having better data on the manufacturing line. In the long term, we can incorporate more intelligence into this process, which will ultimately reduce people and time. So more and more of this process can be automated. Today, we're doing essentially human augmentation, augmenting the humans that are already there so they can move faster and be more efficient. In the future, we'll need less of that. So that's when we get to proactivity. Proactivity is kind of the holy grail of modern manufacturing or modernizing manufacturing movement. How can we know that there's going to be defects before those defects are created? How can we prevent them altogether? And so this is an area that Instrumental is already starting to work on. We mentioned earlier that we have some visibility tools that enable you to understand what's going on your line, but we're actually starting to develop some proactivity tools where we can use combinations of different data sets to either automatically identify the root cause of a problem or essentially validate test limits and optimize processes. So we can walk through how that might work, and these are some of the things that we all have to look forward to as artificial intelligence really kind of takes center stage in the manufacturing space. So the first is that by using a combination of data sets, so perhaps in the case as shown here, this is an antenna performance potential defect, and so in the first chart there, we have the antenna performance of many units going down the line. And you can see that there's some failures where the performance is not good. And those failures can correspond to geometry information, essentially from photographs, so photographs that Instrumental currently takes. And so by combining that performance-based test information with geometry, you can actually potentially identify correlation. So in this case, some set of units, the two that are failing, happen to be missing screws, and so therefore missing screws is it's a correlating defect to the antenna performance defects. So that's something that we know we can do because we can do this manually by looking through these data sets, and what we're doing now is working to automate this root cause detection. The second thing we can do is you can use artificial intelligence to essentially validate test coverage and limits so that you don't overkill or underkill units down the line. And so in this example, Instrumental was able to identify bubbles in a solar module for one of our customers' products. You can see the bubbles. It's a little hard to see, but there's actually bubbles in the glue. And perhaps we also have photovoltaic information that says that certain amounts of bubbles are okay and certain amounts actually create failures for the product. And so you'd be able to use that information to figure out what your limits should actually be for one or the other, either the bubbles or the photovoltaic information in this particular example. And then the third thing intelligence might enable us to do is actually optimize the process. So because every unit that is built on the line has a perturbation of some kind, just normal perturbation. Even in automated manufacturing, there's perturbation. And so in this case, like perhaps the switch module is moving around in terms of its relative position to a button. And it may be possible to actually identify optimizations by looking at all those perturbations and where do you actually get the optimal performance, in this case, click ratio. And so here, by essentially doing this, it would be possible to identify where is the optimal location for the switch, and then you could create a fixture to enable that switch to be located in that optimal position. And so the future is that essentially the line will be able to review all of the data from its random perturbations and assemble a process itself to create the best optimal nominal units, which may be different than the nominal that the engineer originally designed. So really exciting stuff. So just kind of in summary, again, what we really care about is manufacturing outcomes. We're talking about yield, throughput, uptime, time to market, and customer satisfaction. And we talked about how each of those actually is kind of affected by these external pressures that are happening in the manufacturing space. And so as kind of parting words of advice, kind of moving forward and looking at technology in this space, if you're somebody who does that, these are the things that I suggest. The first is don't get caught up in the hype of Industry 4.0 and industrial IoT. The promise of this technology is great, but none of it really delivers fully on that promise today. Instead, focus on collecting and aggregating clean, high-resolution data sets that you can use to build that traceability and visibility foundation so that you can build better today with ROI today. And then as new technologies come, they will leverage those data sets to enable the magic that we're all looking forward to in the future, where the line will actually be able to identify how to improve the product and the process itself and just automatically make those improvements. That's the future that we're looking forward to, and that's the future that Instrumental is looking to build. Thanks again for taking a moment to watch this video, and if you have any questions, please do reach out and let me know. My contact information is right there. Thanks. Bye.